Thank you, Senator Bell and Senator Nielsen, and members of the committee and Assemblymember Hernandez. I will take an opportunity today to talk about the stakeholder engagement process and the collaborative efforts of CalVet, HCD, and CalHFA to administer the program. And I'm Tia Boatman Patterson. I'm the Executive Director with the California Housing Finance Agency. As can be seen from Ms. Riggs and Ms. Gunn's remarks, it has been a successful launch of the program that could not have been realized without the legislature's vision, strong sponsor commitments, significant stakeholder involvement in program development, and the deep collaboration between our three agencies to implement the program. The success of the program relies on an integrated approach, which is built from a foundation of successful existing state housing program models, including the Mental Health Service Act, MHSA housing program administered by CalHFA, and the Multifamily Housing Program, Supportive Housing Program, administered by HCD. Each of these permanent supportive housing programs specifically address housing with services and the need to expand state partnerships with localities, public housing agencies, the development community, and service providers. Together, we collectively built lasting infrastructure to serve our most vulnerable veterans. The interagency collaboration continues to strengthen as we approach the second rounds. We consider future funding strategies. We think it's worth highlighting our work and each of our respective goals. Together, we were able to design and implement a program in record time. I'm going to repeat that. Design and implement a program in record time. AB 639, the bill authorizing the use of the funds for this purpose, was signed by the governor in October of 2013. It was approved by the voters in June of 2014. The initial guidelines were adopted and released in February of 2015. And the first round of funds were awarded in June of that year, just 8 months after being approved by voters. I have to tell you that was a Herculean effort by the three agencies to be able to get that done, and I think we did a phenomenal job, if I could toot our own horns. Based on the experiences of that first round and significant stakeholder input, the guidelines were revised in October of 2015, and a second notice of funding availability was issued. Applications from that round are currently under review and will be announced in spring of this year, and Ms. Riggs has provided you with a summary of what that initially looks like. CalVet, using its extensive knowledge, and I think Ms. Riggs spoke overall about the needs of veterans, and Ms. Riggs spoke about how a heightened service plan were being offered as part of the permanent supportive housing that's part of this program. So CalVet, using their knowledge of veterans' needs and services, has strengthened the program's approach to supportive services and actively engaged in the application review process. And so I'm going to put a little plug in for a commercial break for the two supportive housing programs in which this was based upon. But CalHFA brought its experience to the table in administering special needs housing loan programs, and part of that expertise we provided was based on the state's Mental Health Service Act, which we call MHSA Housing Loan Program, that was developed in partnership in 2006 with the State Department of Healthcare Services. CalHFA's MHSA loan program was created using an initial allocation of $400 million in Prop 63 funding to finance the development of rental housing for mentally ill who are homeless or at risk as homeless. In order to analyze the complex development proposals and establish the MHSA funding levels, the need for a capitalized operating subsidies, CalHFA staff developed a bifurcated cash flow analysis model that is the foundation of the current VHHP financial analysis. The existing MHSA housing loan program will end in May of 2016 when the Memorandum of Understanding with the Department of Healthcare Services expires, but we anticipate exceeding the partnership's stated goal in developing over 2,500 MHSA units by 2019. The success of that program prompted CalHFA staff to reach out to our localities and gauge their interest in CalHFA creating a new program that would allow counties to contract directly with CalHFA to administer their MHSA funds set aside for housing. The feedback was positive, and many counties indicated that the lack of housing development and loan underwriting expertise the housing development and loan underwriting expertise that CalHFA brings to the table was very beneficial. With verbal advance commitments of over $30 million in MHSA funding for 2016-17, CalHFA intends to move forward with the development of a local government special needs housing program. This program will not need any legislation to implement and takes advantage of state-local partnerships to provide additional housing and supportive service opportunities, including opportunities for mentally ill veterans at risk of homelessness. HCD, drawing on their Policy Academy to reduce chronic homelessness, and the MHP Supportive Housing Program, has ensured that best practices in service and supportive housing serve and reach vulnerable populations experiencing homelessness. HCD has brought its experience in gap financing and supportive housing. I want to take a little side note to just give you a little background on the Policy Academy. But in 2013, California was one of 4 states selected to participate in a federally sponsored Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Act Policy Academy to reduce chronic homelessness. Led by the State Department of Housing and Community Development, this federal grant was structured as technical assistance that facilitated extensive research and policy development among state agencies and departments in consultation with the federal agencies and advisors and policy consultants. They conducted over 25 stakeholder interviews, visited local settings, and through convenings, the policy members and working together came up with 5 goals that HCD has been coordinating and implementing these efforts. Those goals included leveraging the Affordable Care Act to fund housing and services, increasing access to the hardest to serve in the state's permanent supportive housing inventory, lessons learned to design the most impactful new permanent supportive housing programs, and support the retooling of local crises response systems with state leadership, investment, and technical assistance, and increasing state leadership and interagency coordination. And all of those goals and all of those recommendations and some of that feedback has completely filtered down into us implementing and creating this program. The MHP Supportive Housing Funds, which is the other supportive housing program in the state of which VHHP was modeled after, funds apartments for tenants who are disabled and who were homeless or either at risk of homelessness. It was funded with $195 million each from Prop 46 and Prop 1C for a total of about $390 million. Over 3,000 supportive housing units have been funded using the MHP Supportive Housing Program. And statistics also show that these households were surprisingly stable, as 66.6% lived in their unit for more than 2 years. A total of 87.1% of the households lived in their unit for more than 1 year. And the reason why this data is relevant is because it goes to show you how permanent supportive housing can change lives. And because we don't have any of our VHHP units built yet, we wanted to tell you about the programs that were up and running dealing with permanent supportive housing so that you know that we do have a track record of providing permanent supportive housing and stabilizing lives. HCD is administering the VHHP program, and all 3 agencies continue to collaborate on the program's implementation through monthly program reviews, service plan collaboration, and a review of recommended projects. In addition to the ongoing meetings with staff dedicated to the day-to-day administration of this program, we have established monthly, and I really do mean monthly, we meet at least once a month, it seems like it's more often than that, high-level policy check-ins to allow us to share information from our diverse stakeholders and to monitor external trends and opportunities. For example, after the first round of VHHP, CalHFA received feedback from our county MHSA program administrators, and that's the partnerships we have at the county level to do Mental Health Service Act programs. And they did not want to restrict their MHSA units regulated as veterans only. And the feedback that we have is because it was too limiting to them and it did not give them flexibility to serve their MHSA tenants that may not be veterans. However, they did say that mentally ill homeless veterans are eligible for occupancy in MHSA-regulated units, and they will have access to county services if they don't have VA benefits. So they want to be able to have the flexibility to be able to put a mentally health veteran that has mental health issues in those units, but they don't want to just restrict a restricted unit, basically. They want to be able to have the flexibility to serve their population. The VHHP program allows projects to fund case management and coordinate efforts to connect veterans to services that are funded in a variety of ways. And Ms. Riggs spoke to that, and she showed you that service model about how the services funding is coming together and how we're collaborating to bring those pieces together. Those variety of ways do include both all state, federal, and county-funded community-based services. We recognize that the program cannot be successful without the engagement of our many diverse stakeholders involved in serving and housing veterans. During the fall of 2013, the state agencies began engaging with stakeholders to develop the VHHP program. And I have it as handout 6, but I think it may actually be a different handout where we give the stakeholder engagement process. Is it 6? Okay. This provides an overview of our very extensive outreach process, which included drawing from the 2013 Policy Academy process of which I spoke to you about, looking at successful models and the elements to incorporate a guiding framework and final program design, over 20 in-person and phone interviews with federal agencies, localities, PHAs, housing providers with experience providing housing for high-need veterans, and over 10 formal public workshops and numerous presentations at conferences and nonprofit housing group meetings. It was a very engaged stakeholder process. We continue to use an extensive and diverse stakeholder engagement process to thoughtfully and deliberately work through necessary changes to ensure we are delivering responsive and impactful solutions. Prior to round 3 of the NOFA, we intend to more formally engage our stakeholders to determine whether program changes are warranted. This group includes veteran service agencies, local government, affordable housing developers, and the Federal Veterans Affairs Agency. We anticipate awarding around $75 million annually for the next 6 years. As currently drafted, the VHHP statutes provide flexibility needed to allow us to consider alternative methods to deliver funds to a broad array of programs, specifically designed to reach hard-to-serve areas, such as our rural communities, and underserved veterans, such as those that have experienced military sexual trauma or domestic violence. We will continue to look for ways to improve VHHP. We are on track to meet and even exceed our priorities identified in this statute. We understand that part of this hearing's purpose was to consider the need for any legislative changes. The current legislation has provided the state agencies with broad authority, and we don't know that we need any legislation at this time. We are confident that any programmatic adjustments can be achieved administratively and quickly. Going forward, the VHP program will contribute significantly to ending veterans' homelessness and preventing veterans from experiencing the trauma of homelessness. We know that we are stronger working together, and we thank you for your continued leadership, and we will continue to collaborate.
Okay, thank you. This time I'd like to ask the panelists, the second panelist, to come forward and make their presentation. Thank you. And then we'll have questions. Better move this right along. And if we could go in the order on the agenda, please. So we have Dana Trujillo is first. Where's Dana? Oh, there she is. Dana, you're first. Yes.
Is it working? Okay. Good afternoon, honorable members of the committee. My name is Dana Trujillo. I am the Chief Real Estate Officer for Skidder Housing Trust. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. Skidder Housing Trust is a leading permanent supportive housing provider in Southern California. We are both a real estate developer and a direct service provider. Over the past 25 years, we've developed almost 2,000 units of permanent supportive housing in Los Angeles. The trust is known nationally for its high-quality designed housing, as well as the innovative service models that we utilize, which have resulted in positive recovery and health outcomes for our residents. One of our developments this past year, the Star Apartments, was selected as one of the top 25 innovations for 2015 by Time Magazine. I'm here today to provide feedback on the VHHP program because we showed early interest in this program and have been engaged with the program and utilized VHHP funds since its first round. In the first round, we received 2 VHHP awards. One project was a new construction project with 100 units. 50% of those will be VHHP units. The other project is an existing affordable housing project with 106 units, and we're dedicating 10% of those units after the project is rehabbed to house VHHP residents. In total, we received approximately $7 million for 59 VHHP supportive housing units. This past round, we submitted 3 applications. All of those are rehabs of existing affordable housing projects. Each one has about 100 units. All of the projects are dedicating between 10% and 20% of those units to VHHP residents. The applications total about $8 million in VHHP funds, and they have about 54 units. Skidder Housing Trust focuses on housing the most vulnerable individuals in Los Angeles, those that are most in need of housing and services. We serve primarily individuals who are suffering from chronic homelessness, so they typically have severe mental illness, chronic health conditions, and substance abuse problems. Of the 1,800 units currently owned and operated by the trust, approximately 3% are formally restricted for homeless veterans. However, based on resident feedback, we estimate that across our portfolio, about 20% of our existing residents have been in military service. As an experienced service and housing provider, the trust has been extremely successful at serving those with the highest vulnerability. During 2015, 90% of our existing and new residents across our entire portfolio remained housed by the end of the year. At one of our developments, we have a partnership with the Department of Mental Health Service and a federally qualified health clinic, or an FQHC, and we're engaged with a study with the FQHC that we've been doing for the past 3 years since the project opened, and we're seeing really amazing results. It's the longest study where we've been tracking individuals on looking at their health and recovery outcomes, and the results are just incredible. The project's called New Genesis Apartments, and you'll be happy to know it has state financing. It has 106 units, and it's on a prominent mixed kind of commercial and retail street in downtown. It serves 75% homeless individuals and 25% low-income artists, so it's a mixed population building. There's 41 residents who've been participating in this study since the building opened 3 years ago. And those participants, when they entered housing, they're all clients of the Department of Mental Health. They were all chronically homeless. They had dual diagnosis or more, and they had severe chemical dependencies. And what we've seen is that after 3 years of living at the New Genesis and receiving high intensive quality services, 100% of the participants are coping with their mental illness and actively engaged in recovery. The study shows that visits to the ER have dropped dramatically and incarcerations have been eliminated altogether. Before they were housed, 67% of the individuals were frequently visiting the ER. 7% of them were going to the ER more than 10 times a year. And after 3 years of being housed, only 8% are going to the ER at all, and they all went 1 to 3 times. So there isn't a single person that's visiting the ER after being stabilized in housing for more than 3 times. So none of the going 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 times a year, that's not happening anymore. So the ER visits went from 67% to 8% in 3 years for a group that has chronic illnesses. So that's an extreme result. Another tremendous outcome is that after 3 years, we're seeing that 100% of the participants are abstinent or have minimal impairment from drugs and alcohol. And all this was achieved through on-site dedicated services and case management, including the collaboration with medical professionals focusing on health and wellness. And I want to emphasize that the trust doesn't require sober living or abstinence to live at the New Genesis. We follow housing first and allow people to enter into housing regardless of what sort of substance abuse issues they have. And all of this was achieved through, we practice the harm reduction model where our case managers work with residents to try to get them to make positive choices. And they've all actively engaged and had a lot of services and achieved these results voluntarily. So with these practices, we know that we can achieve dramatic behavioral improvements with regards to drug and alcohol. So now that you know a little bit about Skidder Housing Trust, I want to focus my attention back to the VHHP program. The trust was drawn to VHHP because the goals of the program align really nicely with our mission and the services programs that we're already providing at the trust. We've been able to seamlessly layer this program with the funding programs and services programs already being utilized in our planned developments. As I stated before, about 20% of our residents are veterans who were experiencing homelessness when they came to the trust. Restricting a percentage, so our population consists of 20% veterans, but our units currently only have about 3% of them restricted to veterans. But because there's a really high percentage of veterans amongst the homeless population in Los Angeles, we tend to receive a lot of veterans into our housing by nature of them wanting to live in our housing. So committing to restricting more units to veterans was sort of a natural choice for us to make. It formally is recognizing what's already existing in the homeless community in LA, that a significant percentage of homeless and chronically homeless individuals are veterans in Los Angeles. What VHHP has done is it's brought much needed capital resources to permanent supportive housing projects that may not have happened without that funding. So even if the projects, you could argue that those projects would have happened, they would have just found other financing, and that is possibly true, but they would have taken longer to get developed. And the VHH program has created a source for gap financing. So it's not only producing units for veterans, but also helping affordable and primarily supportive housing projects to move forward by filling those funding gaps. So what I mean is all of the projects that we applied for were projects that we already had planned both last year and this year. And when the VHHP program came about, we tailored our projects to incorporate a veteran restriction to it. And it allowed us to do those projects a lot faster and to get homeless people off the street faster and to get homeless veterans off the street faster. So it's been a really great resource. And some of the key features of the programs that I think have made it so successful, and a lot of these were mentioned by the first panel, is that it's flexible. It can fund all types of veteran housing, different combinations of populations, families, individuals, supportive housing as well as affordable. So like the general population, veterans have a variety of needs, and the flexible nature of the program produces a variety of housing types, which gives veterans choices of where they want to live and what type of housing they want. It also allows providers to serve veterans of all types of discharge status, including those that were dishonorably discharged, which for an organization like the Trust, who follows housing first and is about eliminating barriers, having the barrier about discharge status is really difficult for us. And it's why we don't have any any VASH in our portfolio currently. We've kind of stayed away from that because it's sort of contrary for us in following Housing First to utilize a program that has discharge status requirements. And so VHHP not having that has been really great for our organization and others that are committed to providing housing for all types of people. The other is the recent change to allow case management to be paid for from project cash flow. It has been a significant improvement in supportive housing in that case management is at the core of recovery and stabilization, and acknowledging that through this change has been fundamental and a great change. And then in general, I think the staff has done a really good job in incorporating stakeholder feedback into the guidelines, and overall it's a very user-friendly and efficient program. It aligns really nicely with other funding sources. It's easy to use with tax credits and other prominent financing vehicles. And on the services side, for an organization like us that's already doing Housing First and is providing a lot of the services that are required, I think it did a really good job of incorporating best practices in the services field and then tailoring those to the veteran population. The two recommendations I think that I would have is on the operating subsidy, when you're deeply targeting individuals that have no income or minimal income, it's very difficult to leverage the operating subsidy at the caps that they have to actually make it feasible to last over the 15 years. And I know there have been some projects that have utilized them. I'm just curious if they've been able to underwrite assuming that those residents aren't going to have any income. Because when we look at the individuals that we serve who mostly are permanently disabled, they don't tend to generate income or a significant amount of income to offset their need for subsidy. So I think depending on what types of residents you want to target with that operating subsidy, those caps maybe should be increased a little bit. And then the other is there's a 20% requirement for your entire portfolio to be restricted for housing in order to achieve a certain number of points as an experienced service provider. And I think that creates an unnecessarily high bar and is penalizing highly experienced homeless service providers. I understand the need to acknowledge those that are currently serving veterans, But the requirement for 20% restricted units, I think, doesn't necessarily correspond to you being a highly qualified service provider. That's all. Thank you.
Mia Kong, President of Domus Development. Thank you for allowing me to be here. It's an honor to be here and speak about this program. I'd like to really congratulate the legislature, this committee, and CalHFA, HCD, and CalVet for establishing this program and making it happen so quickly. And I think for those of us in the trenches trying to build affordable housing, new resources like this are always, greatly needed. And I think in light of the fact that we have dwindling federal resources and the loss of redevelopment, a program like this will really help to stabilize the veteran population. But at the same time, as we've heard today, because it's a new program, I think there is some room for improvement. Domus Development, we are a recognized leader for building and managing innovative, green, infill, affordable housing with an emphasis on serving special needs populations in California. We have used our expertise to complete catalytic projects under the most challenging circumstances, and our portfolio includes over 30 projects completed or under development, and this includes the La Valentina project about a mile away from the Capitol. That is the first TOD in the city of Sacramento, built on a brownfield, and it did earn the U.S. EPA Smart Growth Achievement Project of the Year for 2014. In addition, last year we completed Garden Village, which is the first project in the nation to use the HUD 811 program nationally, and that was in collaboration with CalHFA. So we've taken on very challenging projects and challenging circumstances and tried to work a financing program that would allow for the development of affordable housing, but also supportive housing for a special needs population. Additionally, in the first round, Domus applied for 2 projects under the VHIP program. One was at McClellan Base, about 500 feet from the current VA outpatient medical facility there. And it was an adaptive reuse of military dorms that are currently empty into 53 units of supportive housing, and 100% would be dedicated to veterans. Additionally, back in 2011, we actually designed a project in Contra Costa County in the city of Pittsburgh for 30 units of veterans-centric housing before redevelopment went away. And we were sort of stuck waiting for a source to actually fill. So this VHIP program came in very handy there. Unfortunately, in the first round, we were not successful with an award of either of these projects, primarily due to the fact that there was a little bit of confusion and not a lot of clarity from our perspective on the lead service provider definitions. And so we actually lost because our points were not up to par from a lead service provider and service coordination plan. We've actually improved that. We believe we'll be more successful, and we've actually been able to attract some rental assistance for one of our projects in the Bay Area. Additionally, we've went ahead and we have 2 other projects that we've currently designed for veterans, one in the San Diego County area, and then also another one that just recently won cap and trade funds in the city of Stockton, neither of which we've actually decided to go after VHHP funds because of some of the complexities of the program. And unfortunately, I work in areas that are outside some of the major metro areas. So these are not Los Angeles with, frankly, incredible resources. These are smaller communities with very few resources that are hard to sort of piece together the resources that you need to actually create a program that fits the mold of this VHHE program currently. So I'm just going to give you a couple of observations from my perspective, having done a lot of affordable housing over the years. My career has generated almost 3,000 units of affordable housing in the state of California over the last 20 years. So I've pretty much worked with every type of financing program that's out there in the state. And I just want to sort of call attention to a couple of things I'm just seeing. As we know, Proposition 41 authorized $600 million, of which 50% would serve extremely low income. And of that, 60% would be permanent supportive housing. So in general, the voters approved a 30% set-aside or goal for permanent supportive housing. However, we see in the first round, 66% of the projects were permanent supportive housing. So, obviously we've met and achieved that goal, but with a heavier emphasis on permanent supportive housing. However, of course, the program did look at both permanent supportive housing as well as general affordable housing. And from my perspective, as I see in many of our properties, we are seeing, especially in the Bay Area, incredible displacement, higher rent increases all over the Bay Area. We see a lot of vulnerable populations falling into homelessness because they're losing housing. And so I think there needs to be sort of a look and a balance at both permanent supportive housing, which we know is absolutely critical, but also the production of general affordable housing that meets both the diversity of families as well as seniors, as well as individuals with special needs. I think that entire gamut needs to be met with this program as it was approved by the voters. One of the things that is challenging with permanent supportive housing, frankly, is that there isn't a lot of income to support the amount of services and operations that need to come along with the permanent supportive housing units. And these projects really ideally need to pair up with federal resources like Section 8, VASH, and other resources that provide rental assistance. Because under the program right now, for all of these VHHP units, you must have 45% targeted at 30% of AMI, which that is sort of a hard statute that actually makes it difficult to come up with a mix that can cross-subsidize units. And so what you end up doing is actually, in some cases, many of our projects that we wanted to do 100% VHHP, we actually had to go down to 50% or 20% because of an artificial threshold of 45% of AMI. So perhaps there could be a look at maybe allowing for a little bit more flexibility. Then we'll be less reliant on subsidies that frankly will not exist in the future. Many of our contracts, and we have many project-based Section 8 voucher programs and project-based rental assistance contracts that last for 20 years. And after that, you're subject to the will of Congress and whether or not these vouchers will be available. But these projects from day one actually don't support themselves. Very little of the income can support a conventional mortgage if you're doing permanent supportive housing of a large percentage. And so and then also the operating subsidy that is available under this program is really only 17 to 20 years. Yet the regulatory restrictions for this project, if you're going with the deep affordability, will last 55 years. So the reality is the developer who frankly is putting together this structure, taking a lot of financial risk to build these projects, will know that a looming cliff is coming, no matter what. And so I think that maybe it might be prudent to look at other creative ways for financial feasibility so we can actually guarantee longer term affordability with some other structuring and perhaps loosening of some of the regulatory requirements. Coupled with the 45% at the deep ELI levels, there's also a requirement to have a very high level of service, which we absolutely understand the need for. Yet they're sort of they've artificially benchmarked that at an industry standard of $5,000 to $10,000 per unit for every permanent supportive housing unit. And just to give you kind of a quick reference point of that, we have a project that is only 30 units, of which 22 are veterans assisted, of which half are supportive housing units, yet we have a budget of $85,000, which represents 32% of our operating budget just to meet the basic standards. And yet we also don't have flexibility to make changes to that in the future. Say, for example, we have a need where we have absolutely stabilized our populations, and perhaps there's a change, and with VA's assistance and all of the partnerships we created, maybe there could be a consideration of lowering certain benchmark requirements, because when we look at the long term, we must underwrite these projects that expenses must increase by 3% a year, but our rent can only increase by 2% a year. So what we're having is a problem with operating expenses that are increasing at a much higher rate, at a much higher volume than the actual rents that we're receiving. So what I see, unfortunately, is we've got a dynamic where these projects are not sustainable for the long run. And I think that we need to look at that and address how we might be able to address that. And I think that's a collective effort. And I'm hoping that this committee and others might support looking at other ways that we can keep these projects sustainable. Because frankly, the long-term risk of the project does fall on the developer and the sponsor and the underwriters, our lenders and our investors, who will look at financing these projects. And they do want to see that projects will not go into default under the regulatory agreement because they run out of money and because rental assistance are ended or operating subsidies are not enough. And we must find a way, if we have this kind of investment, to make sure that these projects are sustainable for the long run. One of the things that I think, as I noticed in the staff report, that I was happy to see that the agency has established a goal of, has established a goal of permanent supportive housing that represents about 69% of the goal of the production. Whereas, again, going back to the Prop 41 budget, or the goals, it was 30%. So maybe there is some flexibility where if we can cross-subsidize units, we can create perhaps more permanent supportive housing units and more projects rather than focusing large percentages in existing projects, which then could create more of a sustainability problem.